Now on Radio 4, let's take to the skies with Emily Knight to continue our new wildlife series, Flight of the Ospreys.
The Ospreys of Britain have begun their 5,000-kilometre migration from the Scottish Highlands to their winter hunting grounds in West Africa. Many of these magnificent birds of prey won't make it back home to breed next summer. A team of conservationists is following them to find out why. The Flight of the Osprey team is led by the biologist, adventurer and United Nations ambassador for migratory species, Sacha Dench.
As we head south, we'll be going through Yorkshire, then Rutland, which is another key site for reintroduction, then into Wales for a site there, and then through Poole Harbour, which is the most southerly breeding site, and then down into France, Spain, Portugal, and then crossing the Strait of Gibraltar into Morocco, and from there it's a reasonably coastal route all the way round West Africa and into Ghana.
By the 1st of August, Sacha has gathered together her team of 9 scientists, medics and media crew close to the site of Britain's longest established osprey colony at Loch Garten in the Cairngorm Mountains. As the first of the Ospreys begin their epic migration, it's time to pack up the gear into an ex-army ambulance and 2 other battered 4x4s and set off on a 4-month conservation adventure.
We are finally on the road. First stop is meeting the 3 juvenile birds that we're going to be following, and the fate of juvenile birds on migration is a key part of this whole expedition.
Those 3 birds are Kirk, Glen and Tweed. All young males born this year, fed by their parents from the fish of the River Tweed, a 3-hour drive south, just past Edinburgh. They've just been fitted with satellite tags, which will allow Sacha and the team to monitor their progress in real time and, with a bit of luck, catch up with them in the wetlands of southern Spain or on the edge of the Sahara Desert.
As we head off an expedition, we will keep an eye on the tracks. You will be keeping an eye on tracks here, you and Diane. If you see and notice anything unusual, then let us know.
It's every 15 minutes, I think it is, where it downloads some information.
Diane Bennett and Tony Lightly from Forestry and Land Scotland look after the Tweed Valley Ospreys.
They'll all leave at different times, and the male is usually the one that's left last to migrate. It's amazing how, from the same nest site, they take different migration routes, whether it's down the west coast, the east coast, straight across to Holland, round by Germany, France, all the way down. So it's not like they're going with all our birds. They might see birds on passage, but they just take off and that's them gone.
How could the birds make it back
eventually
and breed here?
What do you think the chances are?
1 in 3. We've not been lucky so far with some of our trapped
1 in 3
birds.
would come back.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that we're happy with that, but that's just nature.
Just exciting to be finally on the move, to have the team together and people working on ospreys really excited to have a chance to follow the journey of the ospreys. I think what I found from previous expeditions is it gives people it's a bigger sense of hope, knowing some real faces, some real people looking out for the ospreys at different parts of their journey. So then we went across to Glaslyn in the northwest of Wales, where we met a woman called Gail, who's been volunteering for the Osprey project there for some time. She does observations and all sorts, and I just absolutely loved the story of her reaction to one of the birds. It had been making signs of potentially breeding with a couple of the females in the area. It had been around long enough that it had become a real hit with the volunteers.
He was a Scottish bird with the ring number CU2. We named him Jimmy. I saw him wheeling around with Mrs. G, a wonderful bird. The news suddenly came through that he had been found hanging from the pylon at the end of a power line, and he'd been electrocuted, and honestly my heart just broke. I mean, even now I could just relive that moment. I cried for days. I just thought, this cannot happen. Our impact on people, on wildlife in this world cannot happen like this.
It was an oldest type of power line infrastructure that meant that a bird with a fish could potentially cross the wires basically and get electrocuted, and that's what had happened to it.
And I looked into this and I found that thousands and thousands of birds all across the world are being electrocuted every day, to the point of putting species at risk, like vultures. And I just thought, right, I'm doing something about this.
So she went, had a look at the power lines, looked up online, everything she could about the different formations of power lines, the structures of them, put together a dossier of everything that she could find and called the power company.
And I managed to get straight through somehow, just through my sheer determination, I think. Next minute, I was talking with someone who said, yes, we will meet you. And I was like, wow, this is really happening.
Within the month, the power lines there had been changed. They'd also taken her map that she'd drawn out of all the areas that ospreys are frequenting around the country where there might be conflict with power lines, and are in a process now of updating all of those as well, so that this form of electrocution can't happen again. And I just thought, for me, it was such a moving story of what can be done when someone looks at an issue and is not completely frozen in horror or grief at it. Next on our route was Rutland Water. But however, we had a call on behalf of a landowner, the owners of the Bolton Castle estate in Yorkshire, saying that they hadn't told anybody yet, but they actually had, well, they thought they had the first breeding pair of ospreys in Yorkshire in recorded history. And would we be interested in dropping by and seeing those and revealing them for the first time?
So my name is Tom Ord-Paulet. One of the gamekeepers spotted them copulating on, I think it was the 28th of April, the copulation. I think it was the 7th of May. The same keeper saw one of the birds lying very low in the nest as though it was on eggs and incubating. So, you know, we were pretty confident by then. So no, I mean, really, really exciting. But there was a huge scare on the day that we'd worked out as the hatch date. And the farmer who had been checking his livestock in the area had sent this picture of the male, but trailing what looked like wire or netting behind it, probably about 2 meters. And flight was presumably a struggle, but also, you know, the terror that the chicks should have hatched that day. He's responsible for going out and fishing and provisioning the nest. So sort of panic stations again. Brian, the river keeper, with his tree climbing skills, and we got all his climbing kit ready in the hope that if he did land in a tree and get stuck, Brian could have whizzed up with some cutting gear. He had his wire cutters and pliers and free the male. But the saying, don't count your chicks before they're hatched, couldn't have been or felt much truer that day. And thank God the male had freed himself of whatever the entanglement was. So he probably landed on something that's got caught and he sort of pulled it clear, luckily. And, you know, he's fed his young and his wife well on the platform, and now she's off the nest, you know, hunting as well. So.
Before this pair, are you aware of any previous records of ospreys breeding in Yorkshire?
No, and I mean, people far more sort of knowledgeable than me on the natural history and things, having, you know, really trawled through the old ornithological books, and we do have quite a sort of rich history of those in Yorkshire. And, you know, it does seem that there's certainly non-recorded and not even any sort of anecdotal breeding attempts mentioned. They're mentioned quite frequently as a passage bird, so, you know, passing through Yorkshire on migration, but, you know, no, to the best of our knowledge, no record ever of them having nested here.
Ospreys travel huge distances for migration, but they're pretty slow to settle and breed in areas where they've been absent for centuries. That's why in several key places across the country, reintroduction projects have been launched to give them a helping hand. One of the longest running is at Rutland in the East Midlands, where 25 years of effort has produced 200 osprey chicks. Tim McCrill works with the Roy Dennis Wildlife Foundation at Rutland Water.
It's a moral duty, really. The osprey was eradicated from England by human persecution, so we're really undoing those past wrongs. And really what the project here has shown is that it's got so many added benefits. It's got people interested in the nature conservation movement. It's inspired people. And I think that is a really important element of the story, and something that Flight of the Ospreys is also doing so well.
One of the Rutland birds has been fitted with a satellite tag, which Sacha and her team will be following on the journey south. He's an adult known as 4K, and in previous years he's headed for an estuary on the coast of Guinea for the winter. It's fascinating to follow these specific named and tagged birds, but as Tim points out, nobody should get too attached to a migrating bird.
We have lost lots of birds on migration because it is a demanding part of their life. We've lost birds in the sea, we've lost birds in the Sahara Desert. There was one particular case where there was an osprey that was migrating through the northern part of the Sahara, and it spent the night on this ridge on the northern edge of the Atlas Mountains. And the satellite data showed that almost certainly it had died. And we actually found someone who was able to go out and track down the exact location of the bird and found out that actually it had been predated. So that was a natural cause of death. We don't know exactly what predated it, but it could have been a raptor or even an eagle owl. The fact is that migration is incredibly hazardous. There are anthropogenic threats, but there are also natural threats. And so the flight of the Osprey expedition is going to be so useful, because the satellite tracking data is fantastic, but of course what it doesn't show you is exactly what's happening on the ground. So actually being in the places where the Ospreys are migrating through will bring it to life and help to identify some of the threats they face on the journey.
The final British leg of the Flight of the Osprey expedition takes Sacha and the team from Rutland to the port of Poole in Dorset and the ferry to Cherbourg. But before they check in their vehicles, there's time to check in on one more Osprey reintroduction project with Paul Morton from the charity Birds of Poole Harbour.
So in context of our Poole Harbour reintroduction, it's been an amazing year. So we started our reintroduction in 2017 in an attempt to try and re-establish a South Coast breeding population. And this year, for the first time in 200 years, we've now had nesting ospreys here in the local vicinity of the harbour, which is just incredible.
The last time ospreys were recorded as breeding in southern England was in the Somerset Levels in 1847. So it's understandable that Paul feels like a proud grandfather when he hears the chicks crying out for more fish.
The female that we have on our nest here, CJ7, she's not actually one of the birds we release. She's a wild bird that has been drawn to the area. I can hear the chicks going crazy. She hasn't fed all day today. She got drawn to the area because of the birds that we were introducing. I'd say one of my favourite moments, the one that really kind of gave me chills down my spine, was the first time CJ7 had just laid her first fertilised egg. This was, I think it was about April 20th this year. The male came back to the nest and he actually wanted to try and mate with CJ. And she simply just shrugged him off, lifted up off the nest and looked down into the nest to say, "Oi, look what's down there." And when there's this magic moment that we've got on camera, on film, where they both look into the nest for the first time and they just, they realise everything's different and that, that their priorities change. Two of the females that we released here down in Poole Harbour as part of the project, they're now breeding up in Wales and they have chicks in the nest up there. One of the objectives for the project was to interconnect all the populations, and we've done that already now. So we've got a Rutland bird down here, Wales have got two of our birds, and the Welsh population established because of the Rutland population anyway. So now we've already got the populations interacting. The next key thing is to get our birds here in the harbour connecting with the European population down in northern France. And if we can get those colonies and populations interacting and mixing, then it should be a strong way forward for ospreys in Western Europe.
It's mid-August, and the UK's ospreys from the Highlands, the Tweed Valley, Yorkshire, Rutland, North Wales and Poole Harbour all have to make their way across the English Channel. Sacha and the team will be following close behind. In the next episode, we're crossing France, along the lush Loire Valley and down the Atlantic coast, where record-breaking summer heat adds another stress to this tough migration.
We headed south through the country, which has been badly hit by wildfires. So one of our vehicles came across still smouldering fires. They say there was 1,000 firefighters from across Europe came in to help.
Flight of the Ospreys was presented by Emily Knight and produced by Alistair Cross.